Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. Abortion is on the ballot this year, the year after that, and the year after that. That's the message from North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein. He's eyeing a run for governor in 2024. WRAL state government reporter Bryan spoke with Stein and people in his orbit, and he's here to discuss it with us. Bryan, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Bryan, you spent quite a bit of time with Stein. Politics aside, why is he an important person to profile right now?
Well, a few reasons. He is the top lawyer in the state. He's also the top law enforcement officer in the state currently. So he has several important responsibilities. The other reason is he could be an important player going to the future in 2024. It's widely expected that he would run for governor. So there's some extra emphasis on who he is, how he got to where he is, and more importantly, what it could mean for the future of the state.
Well, let's talk first about some of the things he's accomplished as AG.
Yes. So the biggest thing that he's probably known for is this national $26 billion opioid settlement. And there was this story of, he wins this 2016 attorney general race by about half a percentage point. And so between the time he's elected and the time he steps into office, during that little gap, he attends this conference and he comes away with it with this real profound desire to do something about this opioid epidemic. So he talks with a state senator who's a Republican, Senator Jim Davis, and they sort of look at this opioid overprescription problem. And within the first 6 months that Stein is Attorney General, they actually get this STOP Act passed, which really limits the prescription for 5 days and 7 days, depending on what you're getting it for. So it was a really major legislative victory, passed unanimously in the legislature. And there's also the national opioid settlement that was happening around that time as well, where he collaborated with others, notably the Tennessee Attorney General, and they cracked down on this overprescription problem from a national level as well, and that resulted in $750 million for North Carolina.
And what are some of the other things he's worked on?
Well, the biggest thing that comes to mind is elections. Elections are very important, and Stein really raised some eyebrows in 2020 and drew the ire, particularly for conservative lawmakers, when he worked to extend the ballot collection period. So as long as you have your ballot postmarked by Election Day, they could be collected up to 9 days after the election. Traditionally, it's only 3 days. So why did Stein do that? He said, well, there was a postal service delay issue at the time for many places, and there's a pandemic. This is in 2020. There's no vaccine yet at this time, and there's a lot of uncertainty. Many people don't want to feel safe going to a polling place, so they rely on mail-in balloting for the first time. And so he had this settlement that got approved unanimously by the State Board of Elections, which includes 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. But the problem was some Republicans said they felt misled about the process, and those 2 board members subsequently resigned. The legislature called it a collusive settlement, reined in the AG's powers after that. So that was really a big political fight.
So you mentioned that he has political aspirations beyond the AG's office. Given the sort of state of play in the General Assembly, why is that important? Why are we focusing on that now, and what could that look like in 2024?
So for the last 6 years, when Democratic Governor Roy Cooper has been in charge, still remains in charge today, he's been able to really stifle some of the GOP's most ambitious policy proposals, from immigration to abortion, you name it. There's a number of things that Republicans have wanted to do, particularly on social issues, that have effectively been killed because of a Democratic governor. And for this abortion issue, if Republicans get supermajorities this year in the legislature, they'll be able to override Cooper's vetoes. But it seems like that supermajority is far more plausible in the state Senate than the state House. So there's some questions over whether this will happen. And let's say it doesn't happen. That's going to really sharpen focus on this 2024 governor's race, where Republicans, if they just get a simple majority paired with a Republican governor, that's really going to boost their legislative goals.
So in a few interviews, you found Josh Stein to be a little different than the person who could be the GOP's leading candidate in 2024. But tell us about Stein as a person and how he compares to his potential rivals.
A little bit different might be putting it delicately. They're like night and day. Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, who is widely, really all but announced a run for governor already, he is bombastic, boisterous. He is larger than life in his personality, and he's really, really hardline conservative and very forceful on social issues, and a completely different upbringing. I mean, he was someone who grew up in poverty, witnessed domestic violence between his parents, didn't graduate from college. Stein couldn't be further from that. Stein had really this idyllic childhood, as he puts it, and his dad had worked as a law firm partner on the state's first integrated law firm. That inspired Stein and gave him some intrinsic motivation for success. Robinson's father died when he was very young, so he didn't really have that role model to look at. And Stein went on to go to Dartmouth. He went on to go to Harvard, got degrees where he focused on sort of the intersection of law and politics, honed his passion, got into an internship with then state representative and now current state senator Dan Blue in the late 1990s. And Stein got appointed by Governor Cooper for this consumer protection job within the Attorney General's office when Cooper was AG at the time. Then Robinson was a state lawmaker from 2009 into much of 2016, and Stein's been the Attorney General for the last 6 years, and Robinson just came to office last year. So you're talking about widely different policy, personal upbringings, and experiences.
So political opponents have criticized Stein for politicizing certain issues as the AG. What are some of the issues Stein's focused on, and what does that advocacy look like from all sides of the spectrum?
So the clearest example of this is you have the Dobbs decision, which basically overturns Roe v. Wade, leaves it up to the states to decide their own abortion laws. And North Carolina at the time has this 20-week abortion law that has been hung up in the courts that bans abortion in most cases 20 weeks into a pregnancy. And so Stein, as the Attorney General, he is tasked with enforcing state laws, even ones he disagrees with. And that's what Republicans would make the case that Stein ought to uphold this law, even regardless of his personal views on abortion. He should defend it in court. And he did previously, but after this Dobbs decision, he really directed his department to basically say, we're not going to do anything to really curb women's access to this medical procedure because we believe this issue is so important. Stein recused himself from this 20-week abortion ban case, but his office would not defend this state law. So on August 3rd, just this year, you have this news conference at the Department of Justice building where Stein is talking about, just the need to ensure women have access to abortion. And some people might see that as, using your office to further a political view. Stein sees that as, my job as AG is to ensure that this is a just, fair, equal state where women have basic reproductive rights. So for Stein, it's not my personal views conflict with my professional job. It's that they inform them in a way that they should.
We'll be back after the break with Bryan Anderson. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the controversies surrounding the state's top law enforcement officer. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm talking with WRAL state government reporter Bryan Anderson about North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein, his political background, and his ambitions for 2024. Bryan, by almost all accounts, Josh Stein is an upbeat and positive guy, but he does have an edge to him. And it's kind of shown up in a recent case over a political ad. Can you tell us about that?
Well, first, if you've ever seen the Lego movie, Emmett. He has very upbeat personality. That's essentially more or less who Democrats, Republicans, even me and just my personal interactions, that's who they see. But there's certainly some fieriness to Stein if you really get him mad. And nothing has got his blood boiling more than this controversy over this 2020 campaign ad that he did about sexual assault kits. So basically what happened was Stein had released this campaign ad and against Jim O'Neill, who was the Forsyth County District Attorney at the time. And basically Stein had said in the ad that O'Neill had 1,500 untested kits just sort of sitting on the shelves. Now, Stein even acknowledges himself that this is really in the hands of local law enforcement. They're not like sitting on some shelf in the DA's office. But Stein maintains it's truthful because, he's the DA. He could do more to work with law enforcement agencies and address the backlog, and he knew this was a problem. And meanwhile, at the same time, you had O'Neill really going after Stein over the same issue. And so after the election, it was decided by 0.26 percentage points, less than 14,000 votes, in a state with more than 5 million ballots cast. So very tight election. Stein describes O'Neill as bitter. And so after the election, O'Neill goes to the State Board of Elections, says, hey, I believe this ad was very misleading. Please look into it. And so the State Board of Elections looks into this issue and, finds, in their words, ambiguity. I mean, it's not a very clear, blatant lie. It's more innuendo, suggestion, appears misleading on its face, but it's hard to say this is 100% inaccurate. It's a straight up lie. Like that's not something the State Board of Elections concluded. So they recommended that Lauren Freeman's office, the Wake County District Attorney, not pursue these criminal charges that O'Neill was seeking. And so Lauren Freeman, she works with O'Neill because they're both DAs. She works with Stein, who's the AG. She recuses herself from this case. It goes to an assistant DA, and the assistant DA decides to pursue this. Why? Freeman won't really say because it's an ongoing case, so we have some limited information to work with there. But basically, the district attorney's office felt there was enough evidence using this 91-year-old law to go after Stein. And Stein says there's no precedent for this. This is absurd. I think that Freeman's just off, is how he put it. And that's this political drama that's really ensued. And if you talk to Stein about abortion, immigration, all these controversial policy issues, he's relatively low-key. But when you mention the words Lauren Freeman or 2020 campaign ad, he can get visibly upset pretty quick.
There's a political angle in here that's really unusual. Freeman is a Democrat.
Yeah, she's a Democrat, but it also goes beyond just one ad. I mean, it sets a question for what's the precedent going forward.
Yeah, and that was my next question. What role might this case have going forward, but not only for political ads, but also for Stein?
I'm sure there's lots of politicians out there who would beg for a nickel for every time they felt lied about on the TV airwaves. And we've certainly reported here at WRAL on several false, misleading ads just over the last couple of years. But the precedent that this sets is unclear because this issue is still working itself through the court process. There was a federal district court judge who allowed this case to go forward and sort of denied Stein's request that this be halted. Basically, Stein was arguing that, this law is not valid because of First Amendment free speech rights. And the district judge said, we think there's enough merit to this law to at least be considered. And so a grand jury had requested that the Lauren Freeman, the Wake County District Attorney's Office, present a grand jury with indictment paperwork. That would have taken about 2 weeks. The very next day, you had a court of appeals side with Stein in a 2-1 decision, basically saying, there's an immediate threat here, and it doesn't appear that this 91-year-old law would be compliant with the U.S. Constitution. But it really creates this question of where do you draw the line in political advertising, and does this change your calculus in messaging, or does this give political opponents a different avenue to sue? Because one might say, if you're really upset, sue for defamation, sue the campaign directly. So this could be a brand new avenue for which candidates, campaigns can really take up their personal grievances.
And as you say, it's also, a vehicle for Republicans to attack Stein.
And I will say, we did reach out to O'Neill. We didn't hear back. So we wanted to hear his side, but we did talk to Freeman. We did talk to Stein. And this is certainly a case that's going to be worth watching. I asked Freeman, you're a Democrat. Would you vote for Stein in 2024? She was non-committal on that. She wouldn't say whether she voted for Stein in 2016 and 2020. But the people I've spoken with don't see this as a real big, severe threat to his credibility in 2024. They see it more as another line of attack Republicans can offer. And I spoke with the North Carolina Republican Party chairman, Michael Whatley, and he was very quick to pounce on this, sort of saying, it's remarkable that we have an almost indicted or potentially soon to be indicted attorney general. And it is a misdemeanor. It's not like some big mega crime that we have seen in the past with other party officials. But it certainly is something you'd rather not have in the headlines.
So if Stein does run for governor, what kind of chances do observers give him in 2024?
I mean, it's North Carolina, flip a coin, heads or tails, that's who's going to win. That's one logic. The other question is, what's the national dynamic? Is President Trump, former President Donald Trump on the ballot? Is Joe Biden on the ballot? There could be a down ballot effect and the national political landscape dominates it. But if you look at, just Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson versus Josh Stein, there seems to be some general agreement that Stein might have a broader coalition. Robinson is a very base loyal, hardline conservative guy who's really proven himself not as able or willing to collaborate with Democrats as Stein has been able to work with Republicans. That could very well just be, Stein has been in office more. He has more actual responsibilities than a lieutenant governor. But that's really where it's at. The other interesting thing is both are prolific fundraisers. It's worth mentioning that. Stein has a longer track record and potentially more connections because of his political longevity. But Robinson has really, really, really gotten a lot of money and a lot of not just North Carolina recognition, but national recognition. He's an NRA board member. So there's lots of room for both to have great financial support and plenty case that both could be the next governor.
And it's not a certainty that any of them will be on the ballot. And in fact, Robinson also faces challenges from within the party.
Yeah, State Treasurer Dale Falwell has suggested that he would run. He's certainly made a case against Robinson. I spoke with Treasurer Falwell recently, and he's the Republican state treasurer here. He also won narrow elections in 2016 and 2020 to get to statewide office, and he's sort of more campaigning on a fiscal, conservative, tax policy type message. And the question is whether that Republican Party still exists today and there's a place for him as governor, whereas Robinson, a very larger-than-life personality, hardline conservative, and a more forceful guy, whether someone like that is where the Republican Party is going in the future.
And how would he stack up against Stein?
So Treasurer Falwell and Josh Stein both have policy experience, have both spent time in the state legislature, have both won statewide office twice. So they're comparable in terms of policy experience and political experience. I think the difference you might see is Stein has gained national reputation for his work on the opioid epidemic. Stein has also taken e-cigarette companies to task like Juul. And so through that, Stein has had more opportunities to really get his name out there, whereas Falwell might have lower name ID and an office that, frankly, not many people might know even exists.
Well, a lot can change in 2 years, and I'm sure you'll keep us updated along the way. Bryan, thank you.
Thank you.
To read Bryan Anderson's profile of North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein, visit nccapital.com. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email that's waiting for you in your inbox every morning with Triangle news, events, and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.